Okay, so social isolation and loneliness, they're a real challenge facing many people in our community, people of every age and background. Now, it's well known that the First United Church has been at the forefront of creating programs and spaces and environments to welcome people, especially those living on the streets and the people around this area. Now, from your experience, how are the people who come to First United Church deal with isolation and loneliness? And who among them you think are the most at risk, and what would be the risk factors, and how do they cope?
I think in general our culture is moving people to a place where there's less vulnerability, less intimacy, and that all of us are at risk of social isolation. There's a lot of self-medication and numbing, even if people don't have a really hardcore addiction.
Self-medicating is a way of shutting down their pain, but even in that, the prevalence of people who self-medicate, there's a community of support within that as well. And so you see some tremendous amount of compassion and neighborliness between people who were in those kind of vulnerable situations, looking out for one another.
Lash out at each other because we'd rather protect ourselves from the possibility of being lonely or hurt, and so it's like, well, I'll get you before you get me. There's some of that. There's people just being disengaging and not being willing to have a conversation because the possibility of rejection or not feeling a part of or failing at that attempt to belong is too scary. And so I think it's the same as almost any other segment of society. It just sometimes can be more exacerbated here.
Sometimes people are also protecting themselves from further intimacy because they've been experiencing trauma in broken relationships before, and that can, some nervousness about that being triggered again in developing deeper relationships or trusting other people. So that can factor into people's continuing sense of isolation. At the same time, there's a yearning for it. And so it's kind of a tension between those two. Ministry here, we have a few mornings a week and also on a Wednesday night gatherings in the chapel, generally called Spirit Circle. And those are experiences where people who intentionally come together, it's kind of a sharing circle as much as anything else, and where they can bring their own stories and they can talk with trust and openness and hear one another and kind of walk that journey together. I think it's an issue that we want to respect with our staff as well, that what we're offering to the community is also a supportive environment for people who are working here as well, because they are, whatever their personal lives may be, they're also affected by the environment and the challenges that people who are bringing those issues into the building with them as well. Food services and so on, and provide shelter for people who are in those kind of lonely and at-risk situations. And those have been services that we've been providing for quite some time. We want to keep that question before us, though, as we look at new directions and new possibilities for how we can be aware of and shape the types of services into the future that are increasingly responsive to those issues of isolation, because they show up in all sorts of different ways in people's lives, and we hear about it.
Is that both the leadership team at First United and the board are really committed to creating a building and a space that will meet the needs of the community now and into the future. And so one of the things I love about First United is, if you've ever read the book Hope Lives Here, it's the history of First United that Bob Burrows wrote. He talks about in great detail the long history of innovative responses to community need that have happened here for the last 130 plus years. And it's an exciting time to look at not just creating social housing and programming space, but like what's the most dynamic and innovative thing that we can do to build on that history that we have of thinking outside the box and doing things a little bit different. And so that's really exciting for